Okay, hello and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today on this Tuesday to learn about FarmQA and our integration to Planet Imagery. So that is the topic for today. My name is Ben Munson. I'm a Senior Technology Specialist with FarmQA, and I'll be walking you through this presentation, but would also be available for any questions that you may have about our integration or our product. So with that said, I'm going to jump right in. Our overview for today, we are going to be talking about a few topics. First of all, who is Planet? I'll give you a brief overview of who they are. And then following up to that, we'll discuss the integration that we have to their imagery. And we'll do that through a live demo, and I can show you how the data flows into the product and can be. We'll also be hitting on some use cases that I've listed out, and I'll be doing that through that demo. But things like harvest timing based on imagery, directed crop scouting, we can do variable rate map applications and create those based on images. And so those are the types of things that we were kind of after when we were targeting the use of imagery, and particularly high resolution imagery through Planet. So a few housekeeping items. We do have a chat available, so please be putting comments or questions in that chat, and then I will be answering those at the very end of the webinar. And if you are watching this after the fact, we have our emails at the last slide here, so you feel free to send us an email with your direct questions, and you can reference this webinar. It will be posted on YouTube and our website. So who is Planet? Planet is an imagery provider. So think of them as a raw image provider, and FarmQA is a platform to process, visualize that imagery, and have value-added services on top of the raw images. And Planet is unique in the industry. So they started in 2010. They are a California-based company, but they set out to capture the images of the entire globe daily. And so their approach to doing that was more affordable actual satellites. And so that was their approach. And I'll walk through kind of what their hardware looks like here in a minute. But the end result is global coverage with those satellites, high resolution. So in that case, we're bringing in the 3 to 5 meter product. And then they do have a sub-meter option as well, which can be tasked. And that would be at roughly 50 centimeters or half meter. And then with that, the other things that come with it, it would be their API, which we can tap into to easily get the data pushed into our platform and mobile application. So those are kind of the key things of who Planet is. They work in other industries outside of agriculture. They have put more of an emphasis on that as of recently. We started to work with them in the spring of 2022. They had an exclusive agreement for their imagery in the agriculture industry, which did end at the beginning of the year, which then piqued our beginning of last year, which then piqued our interest in working with them and bringing that data to bring value to our customers. So the hardware, as I mentioned, so they have the satellites in orbit. These numbers may be slightly higher as of right now, but the key thing that we work with would be these Dove satellites, which is in the center of the screen, which they have over 200 deployed. They're roughly the size of a shoebox, and that's they're in orbit constantly, and the quantity of those satellites allows them to get the frequency of images that is necessary for the ag industry. Along with that, they have 21 SkySat satellites in orbit. These are the high resolution cameras, which can get sub-meter accuracy. And so those are the two kind of hardware pieces or components that we work with and are interested in at FarmQA. So with that, just a quick kind of reference, I talk about Planet being of interest to us because of the high resolution and then also the frequency of data capture. So kind of lay that out and how we compare it to other providers or sources in the industry. So you can see the columns here. Planet would be the data we're talking about today. Landsat and Sentinel would probably be the next most common or frequently used providers in the industry in agriculture. And those are both free sources. So they're government provided. Now, so that is a good source. I'm not going to knock on those providers. This is purely a comparison of that data. So you can see Planet being 3.5 meters when it comes to resolution. And to take a step back, that essentially is talking about the pixel size. And so when it comes down to boots on the ground, this is saying that you're going to have one image per 3 meter by 3 meter square, versus if it's Sentinel, you're going to have one image that's going to be 10 meter by 10 meter square as far as the pixel or resolution size. So that's a breakdown on the imagery, or sorry, the resolution between providers. The other key piece is the revisit rate, or what I've been calling the frequency of image capture. So with Planet, that is near daily with the 200 doves that they have in orbit. And then in addition to that, comparing to Sentinel, that's going to be roughly 5 days, Landsat 16 days. So those are kind of key components. The last thing I would point out would be archive images. So Planet does have archives going back to 2019. You can see some of the other references there to Landsat going back to the 90s, but lower resolution and frequency. Sentinel going back to 2016. So that's kind of a breakdown. We do allow you to bring in Landsat or Sentinel into FarmQA as well through map layers. Planet is just more of the seamless option if you're looking for high resolution and more frequent data capture. So quick reference, and just to see this more visually. So on the top, you're seeing the Landsat and the Sentinel images for a particular month for a particular area. And at the bottom, you can see the images provided for Planet Scope for that same location and frequency. So for example, we're looking at the top, we're looking through the month of February, and we can see the capture happened on the 4th and 5th, then you jump to the 10th, 15th. But when it comes to actual clear images here, we're really only looking at the 15th, and the 20th is somewhat hazy, and so you could just decide if you want that image included or not. So when you're looking at an entire month, you may only have a single image coming out of Landsat and Sentinel. Obviously, this is dependent on your geography, your cloud cover, that sort of thing. But regardless, the Sentinel or the Planet data is just going to more frequently capture photos, so that if there's a cloudy day that happens to be falling in between those Sentinel captures, that would be available to you through the Planet data in FarmQA. So compared to this one clear image, we have, I would argue, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 clear images opposed to 1. So that's when the rubber hits the road, kind of what you're thinking or dealing with when it comes to the frequency. So with that being said, I have mentioned you get near daily capture, and actually sometimes you may get more than one images collected in a day, but those days may be cloud covered. And so when you're thinking about when will I get actual clear, crisp images, that's going to be more like every 2 to 3 days, but again, dependent on the weather. So when it comes to the Planet offering, I talked about the different hardware that they use. So Planet Scope, that would be their 3 to 5 meter product that's captured daily. That's what we started with our FarmQA integration, which we really started the spring of 2021. So we are actually fairly new to this integration, although this piece is well built out and tested. The SkySat, that's what they're calling their 50 centimeter high resolution hardware. That is coming soon. So if you came to FarmQA today, you can bring in those images manually. We're working to seamlessly integrate this particular product into FarmQA in the future. And one caveat with the SkySat, that would be tasked, meaning that the Planet Scope on the left, this is capturing the entire globe daily. SkySat, you would have to designate to say, I want, let's say, 4 50 centimeter images throughout the season, and I want one in June, July, August, and September. Then that's essentially the information you're providing to Planet. They will task these high resolution images to capture on your fields at that frequency. So it's a slightly different concept or business model with that approach. So with that, that's a little bit about Planet. If you have any questions, I'll answer those at the end, but we will jump in now to the interesting part of how that data flows into FarmQA and what our role is in this whole process. So like I said, Planet is more of a raw data image capture solution, and we are a platform to help you visualize and to process the images into useful use cases in the ag industry. What you're looking at now, this is FarmQA Controller. This is our web platform. And the first thing I will be showing you is how to set up Planet integration and to get the images flowing into your account. So what I'm doing here is I've clicked on Settings on the left-hand side. And if I click on this Organization tab, this is available to enterprise admins within FarmQA. And there's a fair amount of things as far as levers and dials that you can turn to customize your account within this screen. And this is actually where our Planet integration lives. And so the pane that you're looking at now is a one-time setup. It is editable if you ever want to touch these settings, but it's a one-time setup to tell FarmQA how you want these images processed and for what fields you want to subscribe acres. So at a high level, FarmQA, it's an acre under management plan with Planet. And what that means is you would tell us how many acres you want to purchase through FarmQA. And that would then be a quota that we would set within your account that you can then tap into at will until you hit that limit. Then you could purchase another bucket of acres. One nice thing within FarmQA is that there is no minimum purchase size through us. And so you could start small, dip your toes in the water, and just subscribe a few fields and get images so that you yourself can look at the value of those images and the use cases that you might be able to come up with them. So those are a few basic things. That's what you're seeing as far as the acres remaining down here. But walking you through in more detail, what we set up here is with the Planet data, we get raw images and then we process different indexes. And so the most common index that you may have heard mentioned in the ag industry would be NDVI, or normalized vegetative index. So that is one index that you're basically telling FarmQA that you want processed automatically. And so you set up a map layer in FarmQA. I've got an entire webinar series talking about map layers, but in this case, you're just selecting from your pre-created map layers which one you want to, what layer or folder essentially you want to pump those NDVI images into. You can also create dynamic NDVI, and I'll touch on that a little bit more in a second. And then just your plain imagery, you can select what folder that goes into as well. We have in FarmQA through our analytics portal, we're tracking metrics for scouting questions, for soil sample results, for weather data. But another metric you can harvest is based on NDVI. And what that does is we're processing, or I should say harvesting, the average NDVI value per image brought into FarmQA. What that allows you to do is compare at a field level the average NDVI across time, or you can compare across fields, which is probably the more practical use case. So you can see, for example, for harvest timing, which fields might be ready to harvest for alfalfa based on a drop in NDVI values. And so that's what we're doing here is you're setting up that metric and it's pumping that into our analytics portion of FarmQA. Another setting that's important here is your % maximum accepted cloud coverage. And so this is going to be what I was talking about earlier when Planet is collecting data or images daily, but if it's cloud cover, you don't want those poor images flowing into your FarmQA account. So this is a filter that you can set to say, I only want images that are less than 10% cloud cover to make it through into my FarmQA account. So this, whatever you want that to be. Depending on your area, I think 10 to 15% is a logical range in, I would say, the Midwest. On the West Coast, we have some Planet customers that they deal with a lot more clouds, and so they are more accepting of 20-25% cloud cover to increase their frequency. So that's a number that you can play with. As I mentioned before, that's not set in stone, so you could edit that as you get into the data flow and increase that, for example. Now, the last component here would be subscribing the actual fields that you want images for. So this is kind of the elegant piece of FarmQA is that if you're already using our system or if you're a brand new user, you can upload field boundaries, you can draw field boundaries in our system, but then at the top, you're going to see we have 0 fields selected. We've still got 5,000 acres. 5,000 acres purchased. So far, we've tapped into 8 of those acres, and so this is the remaining balance in our account. So what I could do at this point is I can search based on a crop, based on a legal description, based on a field name, and I get to a point where I can start to select the fields that I want to subscribe. And as I do that, you can see the quota reducing and my actual subscribe field number going up. And so in this interface, you can select those fields. One other unique thing is you can also do that by the map view. And so if you're more familiar and you want to say, I want to subscribe fields that are around the Fargo area, but I just know there's a cluster in the Northwest that you want to select from, you can start doing that from the map as well, and it will interact the same in our profile. You can also collect down here, and this is going to say, here's all the fields that you have selected. Do you want to confirm that and actually process that order? If not, you could subtract from there, and that would start to remove those fields from that queue. So the key thing here is, so far, this is just building up a shopping cart, if you will. By clicking the update button, that's actually going to reduce that acreage number from your quota or purchased amount, and it will start to flow those Planet images into those fields. In my case, I'm just going to cancel. I don't actually want to subscribe those fields, but that's the process. So it's really quite easy. You can add new fields. Let's say in the spring, you ordered a bucket of 2,000 acres, you subscribe some fields. You could purchase another bucket mid-season and subscribe another set of fields. One thing to note is that once you subscribe a field, you can't, if you unsubscribe it and try to subscribe another field to try to just use that acres in a different location, it doesn't work that way. You are tapped in to those acres once you subscribe them. One last component to show on the licensing side before we get into the more exciting part of showing the data is that within our system, we have the ability to set up on the kind of the back end here, the number of acres that you have subscribed. But also what I want to show here is we do have, I guess I'm on the right interface here, but we have the ability to set a Planet backfill date. So that's another component or value to Planet that you may have seen on that comparative slide or table. Planet data, we can backfill going back to 2014. And so once you set up an account, you can set up initial values. Say, I want all my images or fields that I subscribe to get Planet Imagery going back to 2014. And we will pull in our system all those images that hit the cloud cover percentage. We'll process the NDVI for all the images going back to whatever your backfill date is. So that's another function that we offer kind of out of the box with the Planet data. So now getting into actually visualizing the data and using the data, we've got a couple different ways to do that. I'm going to start by showing you some examples. We did mention the backfill, so I'm just going to show you what that looks like with this example. We have a field in this case that when I subscribed it, I had set the backfill to, I believe it was January 1st, 2019. And this was just to showcase what the interface looks like to pull data back year over year. The very basics here is from the web view. We have first of all, you click on a field. We have a detail pane that slides out from the left. Within this layer section, this is where you're going to see any spatial data set that you have associated to this field. For this particular demo, what I care about in this case is the dynamic NDVI. And so as we look at this, you can see that what I'm trying to point out here is the backfill. So right now we have our time filter set to the previous 12 months. And so we can see all what we call pips down here showing those NDVI images for that previous 12 months. Backfill, like I mentioned, I went all the way back to 2019 for this field. Actually, maybe even further. Let me test this out. Yeah, so it goes back to 2018. And so you can see all these pips going back to that extent of time. And so you can see right now how quickly those images load. And I can go all the way back to, let's say, August 1st, 2018. Here's an NDVI image for that time period. So those images are cached, stored in our system, and you can easily access them. Maybe a more practical scenario could be you could then use this filter to say, I just want to see my 2018 season. And then it's going to filter down to do that to say, maybe I just want to see May through the end of the season here for 2018. And then you can see you've got less pips to deal with or less images that you could then scroll through for that year. So that's kind of how you can tap into the backfill and use our filters to see that. One nice thing to point out here is that when looking at these map layers, if I now want to click on imagery, it will respect those filters. Let me go back to some more recent data here. It'll respect those time filters. And I could say, I want to see an image from, let's find a good one here, August 10th, 2019. But now if I flip over into dynamic, it'll hold that time filter. So you can essentially toggle between these two to look at a comparative between the ortho or naked imagery versus the dynamic NDVI calculation. And then we also have a normal NDVI calculation for that field as well. So I'll take this time to talk to the different indexes. So right now, when I say NDVI, we're providing, think of it as an apples to apples comparison. So we create a vegetative index but we run it on an NDVI scale of 0 to 1. And what that allows you to do is compare, like I said, field to field or apples to apples, where you've got 3 fields. You want to look at the NDVI values or images across those fields. Because we hold those ranges fixed, the color ramps or the color scales are going to be representative whether you're looking at one field or the other field. Now, when I mentioned dynamic NDVI, you can see that this really extracts or pulls out the differences within a field. And that's because the dynamic NDVI is creating a custom range per image based on the min and max NDVI value that we find for that image. And so the more practical use case with dynamic NDVI is things like directed scouting or generating a variable rate map where you want to just pull out the differences. So that's, in our case, what we're calling dynamic versus NDVI. And we'll have other indexes coming in as well that can be visualized and created. So those are kind of 2 components there, would be backfill and the different indexes that we talked through. Another thing to mention here is the mobile view. And so this is a very big component of our product offering. Is once you subscribe in that initial setup screen, the data will flow, meaning that the user is hands off. The new images will just appear in your account as a user, and you can view those from the web or from the app. From the mobile application, there's a few things to note when it comes to imagery. First is within settings, you can choose which indexes you want to pull down on the mobile application. You can choose how far back you want to pull the imagery and for what organizational filters you want to pull images back for. So talking through that in more detail, in my case, you can see these are all the different layers that I have created in this demo account. I've chosen to pull back the dynamic NDVI and then also the imagery in this account. And so if you wanted to, let's say, make the app lighter, you could remove some of these images from your app, and that's going to strip down and make kind of a lighter load for that mobile application to process and view. The other thing that you can do right now, I'm pulling back all the images going back 100 days. If you just cared about the last 30 days, or if you did want to tap into that backfill, you can expand that time range just by keying in a value here of what you wanted to see, maybe 115 days. And then the last thing I mentioned would be the organizational structure. So perhaps you only care about seeing images for one of your 20 growers. You could select just their folder, and then it would remove all the data for the other growers and just save or cache the data for that particular viewer. The other thing to note while I'm doing this is that this is actually pulling down the images, and then they will be available offline. And so you can see Planet Imagery with no satellite, without any data connection on your mobile app from the field. So with that being said, is that once you initially sync these, you'd want to do that with a decent connection, because it is pulling down those images to your app. Once you back out of that layer sync preferences, it's going to trigger the sync now, which, like I just mentioned, is pulling down those images. So now that the wheel stopped, we know those images are available. So what I'll do is I'm going to pull up an example here. It's looking at a center pivot. And what I'll do is from the app, I've clicked on this field. And so we can see some basic details. But to see the actual imagery, I pull up our drawer handle at the bottom. That's what we call this. And now you can see the different layers that I can display. So I want to look at my dynamic NDVI in this case. So I've turned that on. And now this is the experience from a phone. This would be very similar from an iPad to an Android, whatever you wanted to look at this images on. Now you are boots in the ground. Your GPS will be projected on top of this image. And so you could, zoom in on this NDVI image and go look at a particular issue in this field. What you see here in the center pivot is there's clearly a spray nozzle that's potentially clogged, or a lot more likely 2 nozzles. And so you could navigate out to that pivot, walk right up to that spray nozzle that is blocked, and figure out what the issue is. On the mobile application, similar to the web, we provide what we call these pips. And so this allows you to see that data over time. And so as I scroll through this, you can see changes in the NDVI as that crop matures through the season. And so you can see that this is kind of the real-time speed of how those images load. So once they are on your device, we can serve them up to you quickly and efficiently. The other thing to note is that you can also toggle into, let's say, just the regular imagery now. And as I mentioned before, those images or that date range is remembered as you toggle between those. So you really can compare NDVI to dynamic to imagery while all holding that date from the app. So that's kind of the basics of viewing the imagery on the app. A few other things that I want to point out, or really one other thing, is we did mention, excuse me, need a drink of water. We mentioned the high resolution data. So this is going to be coming from the Planet SkySat product. And just to give you a comparison here, what we're looking at, if I pull up the drawer now, I've synced down 3 meter, but also half meter data. And so this is going to be the half meter resolution data, run an NDVI image on that. So you can see, fairly detailed differences in this particular field versus this is a 3 meter image. And so this is just giving you a rough understanding of the difference in those resolutions. And I'll show that same data on the web view, as it might be a little bit more obvious for comparisons here. So as I do this, I'm going to click on that high resolution example field I have, and we'll look at the half meter data. And let's say I'll go previous 12 months. And so this is going to be running, you can see at the bottom, May 14th, when there really wasn't much going on in the field as the crop progressed, and there was a lot of variability in this field. It was very ununiform or not uniform stand. And you can see how the clarity you get with this as you zoom into that half meter versus the 3 meter. You're seeing kind of the same differences, but you certainly lose granularity. So it's just a kind of a good example of the difference or the value in the half meter versus the 3 meter. And again, that will be made available very shortly. So that's another component to be thinking about. The last thing we'll kind of start talking through would be some use cases. And so, like I mentioned, from the FarmQA side, we've had customers that kind of drove us into doing this integration. They had asked for imagery in FarmQA. And at a high level, FarmQA, one of our core competencies is crop scouting. And so that's why we were very focused on bringing the imagery to the mobile application. It's to allow a crop scout to see these images, and one of the values that NDVI can provide is showing you the difference or where there's variability in a field. Oftentimes what it can't tell you is what's causing that. And so that's where we really see our value, is the validation of that difference at a boots on the ground level. So a scout can now walk up to this area here and identify what's going on in this area. They could enter a crop scouting report. Let's say this is actually flea beetle damage and they wanted to take a picture. They could do that from the field. And now this will be captured and tagged to that location. And so if I go back to the map just to visualize that, you can see that observation point now is centered over that low NDVI area. So that's a very primary use case, is to direct scouts. Another option to look at here is, I've got a use case from a customer of ours, and they actually didn't use Planet Imagery in this case, but I wanted to showcase a real life example that I came across actually this week in preparation for this webinar. And so what I'll pull up here is, this is a tweet from one of our customers, Ryan Benjamin's, and essentially what this boils down to is he saw a magnesium deficiency in his soybean field, and so he applied manganese sulfate. And so on the right hand side, you can see some aerial images from a drone of what that field looked like before and after. So what I did is I used Planet backfill data, and I found images for those same date ranges. And so you can see on the left hand side, this is that 3 meter data of that same field. So you can see that kind of the wave in the middle there of the stream that passes through corresponds to kind of this little nodule here. And then as we bounce through, you can see the data. Let me go into a tighter time range here, last 3 days. So you can see July 25th is corresponding back to this left image, where there was a lot of variability in that field where you had that manganese deficiency. And then you jump over with the Planet Imagery to July 30th, which is post-application, and you can see where it's more uniform. And so this showcases how, from an imagery perspective, you can see the differences of where maybe there's crop damage, where there's manganese deficiencies, sorry about that. And then one of the things that we're adding is that you could then generate a variable rate map. If, for example, you're going to go spot spray based on the images, that's a value-add service that we have on top of these images as well. So anyway, it looks like we're running short on time. So with that, I think we'll wrap up. But that is really the basics of the imagery. One last thing I wanted to point out is that we do have customers that are interested in Planet, but perhaps they want to kind of white label our product and deliver this Planet imagery to their customers. So in other words, the value of Planet is trying to maybe show themselves as a retailer or as a co-op, have a value-added service to their customers, to their growers. And we allow that to happen through a white labeled platform. And so if you are a larger operation and you just want to use FarmQA as a middleman to deliver Planet imagery, you can brand our account. So what you're looking at now is FarmQA brand to look like it's CHS developed the product, the software. But now as we get into the enterprise, this is still respecting the colors of an organization. But you can see from a grower's perspective, they could still tap in and see these images within their account. And this would include the mobile application as well, which is, again, more the practical use case. A grower could go walk into a field and say, oh, what's my latest image? And it would just show up on their side through our integration. They wouldn't have to do anything additional. And then we have the security set up in FarmQA where you can set up your different organizational structures or folders. And then you can control who has access. Let me go into account with more users. So you can control who has access at each branch. And so with that, this is essentially saying we have the structure to house the Planet images down to a grower level. And then you can control who within that grower or what grower can see that, whether it's the dad and the brother. You can enter their email addresses and control their access level within that. So I'll end on that just saying that if you just want to use FarmQA as this Planet viewing portal, that's something that we certainly offer through those components of white labeling and the security structure with our kind of easy to use UI to view those images and pull them up on mobile. So with that, let me jump back to our slides. So what's next? We are going to add some additional indexes. And so like I said, we are fairly new to our Planet integration. We started this spring. Everything you've seen, we've built since then. We plan to add additional indexes. So we're looking at some NDVI or water indexes, NDRE, which is just looking at the red edge band. Planet did just come out with some 8-band satellites. And so that's going to allow us to get additional indexes. And so we're tapping into that data set now. The high resolution of the half meter through tasking, that's a work in progress. And we're thinking through how do we build out those tasking interfaces to allow somebody to say, I want X number of images on these fields, on these dates. Then actually coming the next, very soon, probably the most recent of these updates would be the variable rate map generator. And so the use case there would be you select a Planet image, you tell us the number of zones you want to create, you select an interpolation method, that will then generate the zones, and you can write a prescription based on that. So in other words, maybe it's a variable rate application map. You can then write out rates. We'll export that to a shapefile, which could then be uploaded into an applicator. So it's a very basic variable rate map generator. We know that there's people that want to incorporate different kind of weight, different inputs and things like that. So this is more of a simplistic use case. We have customers, for example, that are doing this in cotton, and they're using growth regulators and variable rate applying that, which is basically an on-off rate based on an NDVI image. We also have people in the Midwest that might look at backfilling Planet imagery. They look in kind of the June window for soybeans and find a clear image, and that can be fairly representative in certain regions of the U.S. for where there's variability, and then agronomists might do scouting or applications based on that as well. So those are a few things to look forward to. Additionally, we will end with questions. We've got plenty of time here. If you want to drop, feel free, but I will be staying on for any questions that you have. You can see on the screen here how you can use Teams to input those questions into our chat box, and I will answer those in real time. If there are no questions, I will just wrap up here by saying thank you for joining. We will continue our webinar series going forward, and please continue to join in for those. This webinar is saved on our website and YouTube, so you can share it with others in your organization or watch it again. We are interested in understanding what our customers want to see more of when it comes to Planet or imagery in general, and we are very much open to hearing that feedback and building out your request. So please feel that communication channel is open. You can reach me at my email shown on the screen, ben.munson@farmqa.com. My phone number is shown as well. You can also contact us via our support email and be looking at our blog as we get new content out. So thank you for that, and I'm now going to be looking at the chat if there are any questions. Thank you.